Well, there's a bit of a story behind the survival camp, too.
Oh, there's multiple stories.
Shall we? Actually, why don't we start with that story? Welcome to the Good and Basic Podcast, a long-form conversation with Joseph and Joseph.
In which we discuss the projects we make and why we make them.
Yep. You can find in the video description, you can find a link to an audio-only podcast as well as our social media information. So, good times. Thank you very much for listening. Today, we want to talk about Sherwood Forest. The one, the only, right? Now only 1% of its former size and glory, right?
And probably replanted since the 1800s.
Yes, but still, Sherwood Forest. Okay, so there's sort of two things that are on my mind. Is this was a very, I want to say like emotionally or psychologically significant project for both of us, right? For different reasons, right? I really enjoyed going to Sherwood Forest because of the association with Robin Hood and well, there's a bit of a story behind the survival camp too.
Oh, there's multiple stories. There are multiple stories.
Actually, why don't we start with that story?
Okay.
Is that okay? Shall we start
yes.
with that? So you've watched the video, right? So we camped out in Sherwood Forest under a big blanket of leaves, kind of quasi survival camp, good fun. And well, we survived and even kept pretty warm, so that was really awesome.
So to preface this story, which story are we telling? Are we telling the old story or are we telling the newer story? The Canyon of Our Inglorious Descent.
Oh yeah, I thought I was assuming that one. So
you were assuming that one, okay.
So this isn't our first time trying to do a survival type trip hike thing.
So the scenario is we're both around 18, and we think we know how to do survival camps because we've watched Bear Grylls and seen a couple of survival books, and therefore we know what we're doing. And so we're going to do a survival camp, and it's going to be awesome. And it's the three of us. It's Joseph and our good friend Tanner. And we all decide to go up into the canyon. And, we do a little bit of internet research to make sure that we found a good spot to go. And then I convinced my mom to drive us up into the woods and abandon us.
So this was about 10 years ago in round numbers?
Roughly.
Right? Yeah, so we were... Yeah, well, I mean, there we were, right? So
we decide the way we're going to get water is we're going to put transpiration bags over plants and then catch the water that they're breathing. The only trouble is we forgot to get bags. And so I convinced my mom, who is about to deliver us up into the jaws of Mother Nature, to drop us off at a grocery store to buy some bags. And the whole time that she's driving us up the canyon, she is simultaneously laughing hysterically and almost crying and saying, "You're gonna die." Obviously, she didn't think we were actually gonna die.
So for the record, I was all actually oblivious to that part of the drama. I was just like, "Hey, we're gonna go up in the mountains and sleep on the ground, and well, should be fine, right?"
Should be. Funny thing, one of the few things food-wise that I actually brought for this camp was a bag of cereal rye, harvested from the side of the road. That was the first test batch I ever did. And so we brought that up. That's what we're going to eat. We're going to catch things. We brought string to make snares. It's going to be great. And we get up there.
Please tell me we brought some kind of knife or something to dress the animals with.
I think we brought knives.
Okay, I'd like to think we did, right?
Yeah.
Although I had never dressed an animal up until that point, aside from like gutting a fish, right? I don't know if you had.
I'd seen diagrams.
Oh yeah, good enough, right?
How hard could it be?
Yeah, how hard can it be? This is fine.
So we go and we end up there. We all have backpacks, but none of us have sleeping bags, and none of us have cold weather gear. And we had a frying pan.
It was in the summer, right? And up in the Utah mountains in the Wasatch Front, it'll go down to 40 degrees, a little colder maybe.
Uncomfortable, not dangerous.
Yeah, not lethal. We were not in danger of waking up as popsicles, right?
Yep.
We were just in danger of being really, really, really miserable.
And miserable we were. Oh, it gets better. This story gets so much better. So my mom sends us off. And before she sends us off, she gives us the 72-hour kit that's stashed in the car. And so we have granola bars and all these things that, of course, we're only going to use for the direst emergencies for the 3 days.
It's backup. We're not actually going to use this stuff.
We're not actually going to use it, but we have it.
Going to catch a squirrel or a chipmunk, dang it, right?
And so...
Got the thing. Over a fire that we made with our bare hands, 2 sticks rubbed together. Right?
Yep, absolutely. Oh gosh, it went downhill so much faster.
So no, we don't need granola bars.
So we go up, we spend a couple of hours looking for a suitable place to camp, and we can't agree on a good place to camp. So we keep walking and walking and walking. And then we walk up a little bit up this creek, and we find a place where there's an abandoned campsite. there's a tent that has been collapsed and it's covered with leaf litter. And so apparently someone left their tent there and some other miscellaneous supplies and hasn't been there in months. And meanwhile, I, who had just read the Max Brooks zombie books, was just thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to die. And it's not even going to be from natural causes. And so we continue walking away from the zombified campsite and found a good spot. We set up a spot, and then we decided, we need to start a fire. And so we tried to use flint and steel. That didn't work. And then we tried to use magnesium fire starter, and that didn't work. And then we started using our matches, of which we had like 9. And we went through 6 of them without starting the fire. And finally, on the last match, we managed to get a fire going. So
I'm starting to notice something, actually, which is that you remember this in much, much greater detail than I do. After we finish, after you tell the story, I maybe I should go back and tell my version of the story, because I remember I remember a lot less and I remember slightly different things. Anyway, but so this is interesting. Go ahead. Okay, so last match, we start the fire. Good job, us. Good for us.
Fire. Good job. And then we go down to the river and get a pot full of water, because we had brought a pot. That was a thing that we decided to do. And then we set up a Dakota-style campfire where there's a little pit connected with a cross pit up to another pit, so it's able to draw air. It's basically a rocket stove built into the ground. And, we'd seen diagrams of that one, and that one worked reasonably well. So we have our fire. We boil the water to make it safe to drink, and then we cook up.
Didn't we make pine needle tea?
I think we did make pine needle tea, but that might have been day 2.
So we were on. Okay, we'll get there.
We will get there.
Well, no, there was no day 2.
Well, there was a day 2. Yeah.
We had to make pine needle tea the first day. It must
have
been
pine needle tea the first night. Could have been.
Because we weren't up the canyon down the next day. So both of us are pretty big fans of herbal tea. And so, you start experimenting, right?
And you've heard, if you eat pine needle tea, it's got vitamin C. It's good for you.
We're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so we're a little limited in the drug department. So instead of, experimenting with recreational drugs, we experiment with recreational herbs, is basically how this goes.
Pine needle tea, peppermint.
So I made, when I was that age, I made like a sagebrush tea, wormwood tea.
Oh,
those are fun, but really nasty. But we made pine needle tea, right?
When you say fun, you mean educational.
Well, I actually kind of enjoy them. I just don't enjoy them all the time.
Okay.
They're bitter, but
that's not a bulk thing.
I'm okay with a few bitter things. Anyway, so we made pine needle tea. That's the part I remember. Good fun. Anyway.
Awesome. So we ended up making this porridge, and then we decided, it's our first day. Partially from the grain, partially also from some rice I brought. And then we added in the beef jerky from that, not only to be used in emergencies kit. And of course, this meal we're going to eat like kings, and then we just won't have to worry about this bag of supplies. So we went through about half of it with that first meal. Gosh. And then we set up a fire and decided to take turns keeping watch through the night. So there's 3 of us. We divided the night into 3 sections.
I mean, there's sort of what my mom always told me when I would go camping as a Boy Scout was there's 3 major problems that you need to solve when you're out in the wild, right? Can you eat? Can you keep warm? Can you go to the bathroom? Right.
Okay.
And so we've talked about, we're not going to talk about the third one of those today. We'll leave that to your imagination, or to not your imagination better. But, right. So this is the next big problem that we also faced in Sherwood, right? Is, okay, so how do you keep warm?
Yep.
Right. Temperature goes down to 40 degrees at night. What are you going to do?
Yep. So the short version of the rest of the story is we spent the entire night with at least one of us awake at any given time, sleeping around the fire. And when it was my turn to keep shift through the night, to keep watch, when it was my shift to keep watch, I remember we were running low on firewood, and so I had to step outside of the circle of light and get some more firewood out in the dark. And zombies. I'm still imagining zombies. So it was an adventure, man. So after a bug-bitten, mosquito-ridden, horribly uncomfortable night, we spent the next day sitting around thinking, so this is survival. We're not doing much of anything.
You're right. Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry. I've messed up the story now. You're right. We made it through a full night.
We did. We made it through a full night.
Made it through a full night.
The second day, a couple of us devised more clever sleeping arrangements that would be more warm. And then as it got toward evening, I remembered that my little brother and his scout troop were in the campsite below us. And so we hiked down to where they were just to visit, to say hi. And then they offered to feed us, and then we didn't say no. And so we ate We bummed food off of a Boy Scout troop. And then, we thought maybe we'll all find a different place. And somehow all three of us decided, without working this through, that we were going to keep walking a little bit further down the canyon.
I distinctly remember. Hang on, I'm gonna correct the record here a little bit, because in my mind it was very clear, because I distinctly remember telling you, Joseph, I'm not real hot on spending another night like that. And by like that, I mean that, if you've ever tried to sleep in a 40-degree room, that's a refrigerator, man.
Yep.
That is a refrigerator, right? So I don't know about you. I cannot fall asleep in 40 to 45 degrees, right?
Wait, so you did not sleep that first day?
I mean, you fall asleep, but then you wake up.
Yeah.
Was what I did, right? So I'd fall asleep for like an hour, and then you wake back up, right? So I could cat nap, but I could not get a good night's sleep. And I am, that is my weakness, is sleep. I need it quite badly, right? So I distinctly remember telling you, right, and as I recall, what we had rigged up is we were just sleeping with our backs to the fire, right?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, and not working for me. It was just not working for me, right? So I was waking up every hour, and I just had a miserable night, right?
So somehow or other.
So as I recall, what I said was, I'm not real hot on spending another night like that. Why don't we just go ahead and hike down the canyon?
All the way? Well, no, this is where my memory is a little bit different, because I thought we were going to find a new campsite down closer to the lake.
See, that was not exactly my intention.
So we got down to the lake, which was where
it might have been yours,
where we were maybe going to set up another camp. I think that was the mutual understanding. And then we said, what if we hike down just a little bit further and find a better spot? And then somehow or other, we ended up hiking all night long until about 2 a.m. And we actually hiked all the way out of the mountains, out into the fertile valley below. And then we found a cardboard box, and then we all slept in a cardboard box in a church parking
on a
lot.
cardboard box, really, right? Like, we spread it out. And then, as I recall, the sprinklers also woke us up at 5 or 6 a.m., so that was not real fun.
That was awesome.
Either.
So that was the Great Survival Camp. It was supposed to be 3 days. It ended up being like 2.5. And so in my mind, that was the first survival camp, and I've been looking for a way to redeem myself ever since. Mm-hmm. And so now 10 years later, in Sherwood Forest, we got our chance.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, because, we've talked about this before, right? Like, that, to me, that incident from 10 years ago, really didn't stick in my memory, right?
Yeah. There's this quote that you like to bring up. The difference between theory and practice is that in theory, there is no difference, and in practice there is.
Yeah.
I don't know. This was a place where my mental map broke down really hard, because up to that point, I had done a lot of research on how blacksmithing is done theoretically in books. I'd done a lot of research on how survival is supposed to work theoretically in books. And how hard could it be?
Yeah.
You go up, you try it out. I mean, I've read all the right things. I should be able to do this. Mm-hmm. And then
I know the feeling, because I had read some survival books too. So
failure. Not a little failure.
You look at the diagrams and you're like, okay,
I raided a Boy Scout camp for food. By day 2, you're not even starving until you're in for 3 weeks?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So that was my first survival camp.
I was just thinking, okay, I'll just mention one or two things from my memory, right? But apparently my memory has broken down just a little bit so some combination of the two plus a little more was probably what actually happened, right? Right, so we go up, and I remember the gruel, and I was just like, I was not, how would you say it, I was interested in trying out all the things. I remember setting snares, right? I think you handled the bags, trying to get liquid to condense on the bags. I don't think I did that, right?
That was a complete failure, by the way.
For me, the big surprise was, I think, sleeping outside, right? I mean, I'd slept outside plenty, right? I'd gone camping, I'd slept out on my back porch as a kid, right? All sorts of things, right? But it's a different story when you don't have any insulation beyond the clothes you're wearing.
Yeah.
Right. And so that actually did surprise me, because that was probably my first time, probably my first time ever sleeping in a refrigerator. Right. And so that was the night that I learned that, hey, okay, that's a thing that I now know about myself. I cannot sleep for more than an hour in a refrigerator.
Yeah.
Right.
That actually reminds me, in about 2005, I was on a Boy Scout camp where a boy went missing. He was technically too young to be there. It was crazy, and he was lost in the high Uinta Mountains. And it was bizarre. I witnessed a so I got to participate in the search and rescue effort, searching the mountainside, looking for him. Had to go home before he was found. He ended up spending like 4 or 5 nights out in the wilderness, but they found him. Miraculously, they found him.
Which is amazing.
It is.
It's not a guarantee.
The first night that I was on the camp, which was before he got lost, I remember how cold it was at night. And then the night he got lost, it was ridiculously warm. And the next night, and the next night. And it was, there was a string of miracles that led to him eventually being found.
It's incredibly fortunate.
Yeah. Also, it was full moon, and fairly bright for the nights that he was missing.
That's also very fortunate.
Yeah.
The other thing I remember is that I brought up a book, Josh Waitzkin's The Art of Learning. So Josh Waitzkin was a child chess prodigy, right? And then also took up Tai Chi later and became quite good. I don't remember how far he got in Tai Chi, but he was, if I remember rightly, he was competing on an international level. So he was pretty intense, right? And that's really cool to have to look at somebody who is good at a highly cerebral activity like chess and then a highly physical activity like Tai Chi. And it's like, wow, that's pretty interesting. That's the kind of person you want to watch and learn a thing or two from, right? So I was reading his book, and as I recall, it was pretty good. And what made me think of this was something that you said as you were describing the story of what we were doing up there, which is, you go up there the second day and it's like, okay, well, what do you do all day, right? And the answer is, I don't know, you just survive, right?
Yep. I remember the intense boredom.
Yeah.
Almost more than anything else. That's probably what drove me off the mountain. I mean,
I wonder, this is interesting, because I wonder if that was true for me too, because I was reading Josh Waitzkin's book and that was good fun, right? Yeah. But I wonder if in a larger sense it might be true. There's a quote from Viktor Frankl, who founded the Viennese School of Psychology, and he was in a Nazi concentration camp for a while in World War II, and one of the things that he said, actually, I can't tell if this is him saying it or Nietzsche.
I think it's a Nietzsche quote.
This is one of those, it's, just because a quote is next to someone's face on the internet doesn't mean that it's real. Abraham Lincoln said that. So, yep. And anyway, so but the quote is, if you have a why, you can bear almost any how.
That one's Nietzsche.
Right.
That's him quoting Nietzsche.
And that was the founding idea out of which he founded the Viennese School of Psychology, which focuses on, it's contrasted, if I recall correctly, to the Adlerian and the I think it's the Adlerian and the Nietzschean. Freudian, that's right. No, is it Freudian? Whatever it is. So there's the will, maybe it's Freudian and Nietzschean. I can't remember what the other one is along with Freud, but so for Freud, at least this is how it was described to me, is that for Freud it's the will to sex, basically, the will to pleasure at very least, and for Nietzsche it's the will to power. He's considering that as sort of the base human motivation, and for Viktor Frankl it was the will to meaning. Yeah. So the idea is, well, if the narrative of your life had sufficient meaning, then it would aid you in enduring the suffering, setbacks, and problems that occur along the way, right? Yeah. So I can't help but wonder, maybe if we had more to do in a way, if there had been more, I mean, this is a very loaded way to say it, right? But if there had been more meaning to the experience, maybe we wouldn't have gotten bored and gone down the mountain. That's an interesting, I don't know what you think of that.
I agree. And here's another thing I want to add to that. One of the things that's really problematic when you go up into the woods and you don't have an itinerary, and there's not a list of to-dos, not even tasks, not even things to do around camp. I mean, we were literally just sitting there and then passing the one book we had between the three of us back and forth. I think Tanner brought a set of scriptures, and so maybe there was some reading there too, but I can't do that all day. And so the problem of, okay, so what do you do? What is my purpose? What am I doing here? Becomes more clear. It's like
it's almost like we went to the top of the mountain and we were just like, okay, here we are, surviving.
But
yeah, I know, you just take breaths over and over again. You're like, look, I'm still living, I'm still alive, I'm still alive.
Yeah.
Right, and it turns out that that's not enough to keep you going.
It's true. There's this idea that I've wondered about, which I think one of the fundamental human gifts is distraction. And I think distraction is an incredibly valuable thing, and like anything else, it can be corrupted and turned into a vice. But I think fundamentally, Nietzsche talks about staring into a void until the void starts staring back. the fundamental questions of life, meaning epistemology, how do you know things, are frustratingly difficult to solve, especially if you're looking for absolute answers, ones that work in a completely solid theoretical way. And I think that at least partially distraction is one of the things that allows us to keep our sanity so that we don't stare at the question too long at any given time. I think we can make progress. I think we can live well, but I don't think that you do that through your head. And I think if you do it solely through your head, you can go nuts.
You know, that reminds me, or that makes me notice a difference between the Sherwood experience and our experience 10 years ago, which is that the experience 10 years ago was, in some sense, as far as I can tell, right, and you can correct me on this or qualify the statement, but more or less disconnected from everything else, right?
Yeah.
What were you going to do? You go up the mountain, you do it, and then you go home, and then it's an isolated episode, right?
Yeah.
But for Sherwood,
mostly for bragging rights.
What we were doing was solving a problem, right? And it was a real problem that we both cared about very intensely, because there we were.
I'm interested. How would you describe that problem?
The problem was, how do you stay warm at night?
Oh, so you're jumping further forward.
Well, I mean,
to the point where
in my mind, that was the core issue at Sherwood, right? I mean, food was not an issue, right? Plenty of stores all around, right? You don't worry about that, right? But what really, in my mind anyway, the real challenge in Sherwood was, okay, well, how do you stay warm at night? Because you have options, right?
Yeah.
We could go stay in a hotel. But then we're staying in a hotel. We're not staying in Sherwood. That kind of defeats the purpose, man.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we could also, get in the car, sleep in the car. Okay, well, that's not ideal, right?
Sure.
We don't want to go to Sherwood and then sleep in the car if we can avoid it. That's not high quality, right? And so the problem really was, okay, how are we going to camp out here and stay warm?
Yeah.
That was the problem in my mind anyway. That's roughly how I'd formulated it.
So a little bit of background for this particular adventure. We had already established that we wanted to camp in Sherwood Forest.
Yeah.
And then we lost our luggage, which had all the camping supplies.
Mm-hmm. The sleeping bags was the big thing.
Sleeping bags. Sleeping bags and hammocks were the things missing. Yeah. And so the question is then, do you go camping without these things, or do you not? And so in my mind, there's two levels to that decision. One of them is, do you go camping? And that's the one that you need to solve first, is it worth it without my sleeping bag and camping supplies to continue pursuing this experience? Is that experience so worthwhile that it's worth figuring it out? And pretty early on, I guess, we decided, yeah, we're going to do it. And then you jump into the technical problem of, okay, we've decided that this is the what we want to do. Now we need to figure out the how.
Yeah, although in my mind, the two were pretty united, right? Like if we had not been able to figure out a way to stay warm, right? Like if we'd been sleeping, well, I don't know, if you're sleeping on a sand dune, I guess we tried piling
I seem to recall that in the conversations where we were deciding whether or not to do it, because we took a couple of days trying to figure out whether we were going to.
Yeah.
It was just something we would chat about while traveling between spots.
Yes, yeah, okay.
No, and I remember the discussions about, would it be worth spending a miserable, cold, bug-bitten night to spend a night in Sherwood Forest, with the legend of Robin Hood. Is he a real person? We don't know, but just to be participating in that story.
Yeah.
And
the answer was yeah.
The answer was yeah.
And the answer was this is a game that it would be better to play and lose than to not play.
Yes. Yes, it would be better to play this and be miserable for a whole night than to not do.
And well, we had both spent a miserable night before out in the woods, so
we know
that's a real possibility, man. That's a thing that can happen. You're absolutely right.
And so then we got into the technical side of how to fix it, and you came up with the idea of piling the leaves, and then we had purchased blankets. Each of us bought a tartan blanket in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And that was with this in mind, as maybe if we do decide to do it.
Yeah, in case our luggage doesn't show up. Of course it will, but in case it doesn't.
Yes.
Right.
It was 2.5 weeks before the luggage actually showed up. It was a couple days before we went home.
Yeah, well, better than never,
Yep.
So.
Although the one thing that didn't make it was my parched corn. There was an external pocket on my luggage that tore off somewhere in the handling, and that happened to be where my stash of parched corn was.
I remember.
So that was sad.
So I'm thinking about the differences between the two, and one of the things that I'm noticing is that, what I'm thinking of is in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Pirsig and his son are hiking up a mountain, right? And for a while, Pirsig talks about what he calls ego climbing. And he contrasts ego climbing to, I don't know what you would call it, roughly speaking, Zen climbing, right? The proper attitude and approach to hiking up a mountain, right? And in the story, his son plays the foil of in this particular episode, he plays the foil of the ego climber, right? He's not really climbing because he wants to climb. He wants to have climbed. He wants a part of the experience, but does not want the whole experience, right? And so he tends to rush and make mistakes and just not do it in the best way possible, right? And then Pirsig tells a story when he was living in India that he wanted to hike up a mountain. He went with monks, and the monks were going on a religious pilgrimage up the mountain, some kind of religious site. But he mentioned that he had to give up after a couple of days, and he said, "I had the physical strength to do it, but I didn't have the psychological, emotional, and spiritual strength to do it because I wasn't committed to it in the same way that those monks were." And so they were able to go ahead and complete the climb, but I had to turn back because it turns out that the physical strength to do something is not enough.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of other psychological, emotional, and spiritual, roughly speaking, factors tying into this.
This ties neatly into that idea of a man can endure almost any how as long as he has a why to live. That idea, because, in our initial survival camp, our survival was really not in peril. Otherwise, my mother never would have allowed it.
Yeah.
As far as
again, 40 degrees, the worst that can happen.
Extreme discomfort.
Yeah.
We're not going to lose any limbs. Frostbite is not a risk at that.
Yeah.
And we have a fire. We're going to be more or less okay. As far as
more or less than more, but
water,
more or less.
As far as water went, we had access to a creek. We could boil water. We had as much as we needed.
And you can go 3 days without water too.
Yeah.
We weren't gonna die.
And then as far as food goes, you can go a very long time without food. Worst case scenario would be a couple days fasting. And the granola bars my mother had packed meant that it would only be probably 1 day fasting. But even with that, we really struggled to figure out why we were up there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you get up there and you just breathe and you're like, I'm surviving, I'm doing the thing, right?
Yeah.
But it turns out you want a lot more, right? And there's a huge contrast between that and, at least for me, while I was doing it 10 years ago, there's a huge contrast between that and Sherwood Forest, where Sherwood Forest for me was kind of that, quasi-religious pilgrimage, right?
How would you describe that in more detail? Like how?
Yeah. Well, it was.
Because this is the one that, when we were putting together our itinerary for the trip, looking for things to film, looking for people to film with, Sherwood Forest was very high on your priority list. And
specifically camping in Sherwood.
And I wasn't terribly excited about the idea because it would require packing,
there's all
sleeping bags and tents and that sort of thing, or so I thought. Mm-hmm. But could you describe a little more of like what that meant in the moment of planning the itinerary?
Yeah, I will try, right? It's not the easiest thing to do, right? There's something really interesting that I've learned in the last few years that I guess I should have known before is that many of the things that are meaningful to you, you don't know exactly why they're meaningful, right? Nonetheless, I'll give it a try, right? So, I was kind of thinking about this today as we were prepping for the podcast. I was like, okay, well, Joseph, why do you like Robin Hood so much? And is there a connection between Robin Hood and what we did there, right? The sleeping under the leaves, right? Doing that quasi-survival camp. And the answer I came up with was actually came from some of the YouTube comments, right? People started mentioning the gosh, I can't remember what it's called, but it's that 9-part grid that maps people: chaotic, evil, lawful, evil, lawful, neutral, so on and so forth. Along it's a 9 block measurement that measures your moral alignment, basically, whether or not the degree to which you respect the law and the degree to which you respect right and wrong, right? And it came up in the YouTube comments on the video that that Robin Hood is chaotic good, basically, right? He's not lawful good, he's chaotic good. He is a good guy, but he breaks the law to do it, right? Because it's an unjust law. If there's a conflict between the law and morality, well then, Robin Hood says, well, I'm going to do the right thing.
Just like Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah. It's a very sort of civil disobedience revolution type thing, right?
Where you want to get the alignment to right and wrong rather than necessarily between what is legal and what is not.
Exactly. So I was thinking
on that nine-part grid, it's possible to be a lawful evil. Where you're imagining things like the Spanish Inquisition.
Or concentration camp guards. Very lawful, very evil.
Yeah.
Or to use the meme, very lawful, much evil, right? Okay, so, sorry. I'm thinking of another episode in a story, right? For those of you who read Brandon Sanderson, I'm thinking of the Stormlight Archive. In the Stormlight Archive, there's a character named Seth Son Valeno, who is an assassin, right? And eventually he, by the third book, spoilers, so go ahead and skip forward a minute if you haven't read Oathbringer, he achieves some measure of redemption, and he joins a group that is dedicated to sustaining laws, right? And what he ends up doing as part of this procedure, he swears oaths, right? And so rather than when the moment comes, rather than swearing an oath to follow the law, he swears the oath to follow the word of a particular person who he trusts very much.
Because he doesn't trust his own moral code. He doesn't trust his ability to distinguish what is right and what is wrong. Up to this point, he has been an absolutist in terms of obeying laws and promises.
Yeah.
If he makes a promise, he will keep it, even if it is a terrible promise that involves killing people.
Yes, which it does.
Which often.
Fantastic books, by the way. If somehow you haven't picked up Brandon Sanderson, he has a lot of books, but the ones that we're talking about are the Stormlight Archive. I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description. They're mind-blowing.
Incredible.
Mind-blowing.
So this character, this lawful assassin,
yes,
is sent at one point to kill a particular man who is desperately trying to follow what he believes is right, and is trying to strengthen his internal compass to know what is right and wrong. His name's Dalinar, and he's a fascinating character because he used to be a really bad guy, a warlord type character. And anyways, this lawful assassin swears an oath to him because he doesn't trust his own moral code yet, but he trusts Dalinar's.
Yeah.
And so he says, I will follow the law or the word or the promises that I make to this man until I'm able to, presumably,
to discern it myself. Basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this is that in some sense, right, and this is not universally true. It's not totally true, but it's largely true. Is that we outsource a lot of our morality to laws and codes and the judgments of others, right? But if you're going to be chaotic good, you don't get to do that, right? Somebody who's chaotic good like Robin Hood, if you're not going to look to the law to decide what's right and wrong, then you need to look to something else, right? And in the case of Robin Hood, at least you need to have a lot of faith in your own ability to discern between right and wrong. Right, because you're going to make those decisions. You're not going to outsource it to anyone or anything else, right? So that was kind of what I was something that I really admire about Robin Hood. I was thinking, and something similar is that Robin Hood is somebody who has skin in the game.
Yeah,
right. He is making decisions, and he pays the penalty for his decisions, and he pays the penalty for his moral decisions. Right, he has decided that it is more moral to live in the woods. Rob barons and give to the poor than to, there's different ways to be an outlaw, right? He chooses to be a virtuous outlaw, right? He makes all those decisions, and he potentially bears the penalty for that. And eventually, at least in the versions that I read as a child, he does die. He does, he pays the price for taking on himself the responsibility for determining right and wrong and pursuing it as best he can.
Yeah.
And so that's something very admirable, and kind of why, in my mind, it was a pilgrimage. And the way that it connects to Sleeping Under the Leaves is that, I don't know, it's connected to the difference between theory and practice. But we were taking upon ourselves responsibility. And thank heavens we were able to do it competently this time around.
Yes, well, we're both still alive, so that's a good thing.
We were warm.
Comfortable.
Right?
There's another connection that I see in the Robin Hood story, and here's the trouble if you're going to be chaotic good. Oftentimes, if you're going to trust your moral code, you need to know that your moral code is actually pointed to what is right and wrong, because the terrifying prospect is that you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What if you're wrong? What if it's an unjust revolution? What if it's an unjust war?
Mm-hmm.
You always run into that same problem, whether you're lawful or just aligned to the good.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, what if it's wrong? What if it's an unjust law that I'm supporting while I'm being lawful? Then that's wrong.
Yeah.
What if it's an unjust moral code in my heart that I'm following? What if it's just my personal desire that I'm following and not the good? And that's this terrifying problem. And so the skin in the game aspect, the ability to bear the consequence, this is a principle in civil disobedience that Ralph Waldo Emerson and Gandhi both talk about, which is that if you're going to civilly disobey the law, you have to be ready to serve jail time for it.
Yeah. Otherwise you're a poser. You're a fake. Right, which is the thing that drives me nuts about some protesters today, is that they want to have their cake and eat it too. You know?
Antifa with the masks.
Yeah, they want to disobey the law and not bear any penalty for it. And I'm like, okay, I don't think we quite understand how this civil disobedience thing works.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things that I find really interesting, and this is a discussion that we had throughout the Europe trip, was there's this quote from G.K. Chesterton, which is that a thing worth doing is worth doing badly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I find that to be an incredibly useful way of determining whether you're making the right choice. I used to be a martial arts instructor, and so I've thought a fair amount about violence. And one of the things that I have come to think about a lot recently is that the only time it is acceptable to get into a fight is if it is morally acceptable to lose that fight horribly. And so as you're calculating, so there's this fight that you could get into, and it's this pride fight, right? I'm better than you. No, I'm better than you.
Yeah.
And then that goes into a fight. Well, if you lose that horribly, there's nothing gained. There's nothing. I mean, you win, sure, I'm better than you, blah, 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 blah. But the only fight that's worth getting into, when we were on the trip, we visited Hastings.
Yeah.
And Hastings is a fascinating place to me, or rather the town of battle, because it's a place where a group of men got together, the Saxons got together to defend their homeland against an invasion. And they gave their all and still lost. And so you think about that decision to go and fight to repeal an invasion, and you have to think about the morality of that decision regardless of consequence. Is it right to fight if I win? Well, I mean, that's harder to decide. Is it right to go to that fight knowing that I might lose horribly? Will it still have been the right decision to go to fight if I lose? And I think that is the way to decide whether a fight is right. It is never acceptable to go into a fight unless it is also acceptable and more moral to lose the fight than to not have it. So that's my position on fighting. I think. I mean, that's the position I've come to.
Okay.
In the case of going to Sherwood Forest and camping under the leaves, we came to the decision that it was more worth it to go and try and be miserable
potentially
than it was to not do it.
Yeah, and I would have stood by that decision.
Yeah.
Right. I would have been miserable, but I would have stood by it. That's interesting. I mean, this is a large sense of 90% of the stuff that we do on this channel, on the YouTube channel, right? Is this issue of taking responsibility and having skin in the game, right? And the augmented personal power that comes with that, and the way all that's meshed together.
Fundamental core issues, understanding things at a more foundational, fundamental, smallest common unit way, but in a real way. I mean, it's not enough to know something in theory. You kind of you need to do some exploring.
Yeah, which is something you mentioned a couple podcasts ago, that in your mind the thing uniting everything we do on the channel is exploration, right? And yeah, I mean, exploration by necessity is an act of responsibility.
Yeah, because you're going into a place you haven't been before, and it might be good and it might not.
Yeah, and you might do a good job there, and you might not, and well, you get to watch how everything shakes out. Gosh. Okay. Sorry. There's too many thoughts in my head now. I'm trying to sort through them all and pick them out. I'm curious. Do you have anything else to say about that the aborted survival camp 2 years ago, 10 years ago rather.
Oh, I
Slash the differences between that and the Sherwood Experience.
So for one thing, we were comfortable. There's a difference there. For a second thing, so bringing this back to the idea of a thing worth doing is worth doing badly. Going up to do the survival camp would be awesome, but the reason we went, or at least the reason I went, was to prove to myself that I really did know how to do this stuff, that I really was as good as I thought I was. My dad did a little bit of laughing and said, you've read it in the books. Can you actually do it? And I said, well, I've read it in the books, therefore I can do it. And I went and I failed. And having failed, I thought, gosh, maybe it was the wrong quest to go on in the first place. That was a particular battle, if you will, that having lost it, I realized that it was the wrong battle in the first place. I was going up there to try to validate and prove that I knew things, where what I should have been doing was in a more careful environment. I should have been testing my ability to do things rather than going in to assert and prove that I could. Does that make sense?
Yeah, an active. Yeah, it's an ego climbing, right?
Yeah,
ego
completely.
survival camping.
I can do this. Let me go prove it.
Yeah.
Rather than, I don't know if I can do this. Let's go find out. What I needed was some epistemic humility, and I got a dose of humiliation, which is the next best thing.
Humiliation sometimes leads to humility, right?
It can.
No, it's interesting you should say that, because that was very much my observation too, was that the Sherwood thing was much more organic and sort of, we were not trying to showboat, we were just trying to make the thing work.
Yeah.
Right?
And the goals were specific. I mean, we weren't going to go foraging for food just to prove the principle. In this particular case, it was a rather narrow test. It was, can we spend the night in a place comfortably?
Yeah.
The food thing, I mean, that was amazing.
Oh.
We stopped by a local supermarket and bought a roast of lamb and roasted that by the side of the fire. And I discovered roast onions, which, if any of you ever go camping, and I sincerely hope that you do, if you take an onion and just cook it right in the coals of the fire, the outside turns black and you peel that off, and then the inside is so sweet.
You'll be so surprised.
It's incredible. Just eating an onion straight
beautiful.
off the... Wow.
It was beautiful. No, like you wouldn't think you could just eat an onion like an apple and enjoy it.
And appreciate it.
Yeah. But well, we did. We did. Yeah, no, that's very much my observation too, right? And that was another lesson I pulled away is, hey, let's try to test these things in laboratory conditions as much as possible, right? Well, it's interesting because I'm thinking of also the quote from Jung, right? Beware of knowledge unearned.
Yeah.
Right? And that also seems to apply where, 10 years ago, we were kind of trying to just do everything in order to have done it, right? And whereas in Sherwood, it was like, no, we have, this fits, it's not a thing that stands by itself. It fits in with all the other pieces. We're here in England doing tons of stuff. We're here in Sherwood for stuff. And we also need to spend the night somewhere. And here would be a place to try to do it, right? So the how to put it.
It was more than just functional, though. I mean, if we had decided that we just needed a place to sleep,
Yeah.
we could have just booked an Airbnb.
But it matched function to meaning, sort of. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. It was much better integrated, it seems like, with everything else. You don't like that description.
I don't think that's the best description possible, because one of the things that defined that experience was that it was worth doing even if we were miserable. And to me, that seems to be the most salient takeaway from it. Mm-hmm. But
because we actually legitimately wanted to do it, whereas we weren't
for
just
its
trying
own
to
sake. The ability to prove, there was a lot less ego involved.
Yeah,
like there was a very aware,
we
experience.
were there, but we weren't the only thing there.
We were from experience. We knew that it's a thing that could go badly.
Yeah,
and we weren't overconfident. But that's not it either.
No, we were grooving on the Dow, man.
Just trying.
Beautiful Zen camping. Beautiful Zen camping.
Zen camping with roast onions is something I am totally down for. That was awesome.
Absolutely. Well, and I think we'll probably try some more stuff like this in the future, right? It would be good fun. It's always interesting to test these techniques, right? But Well,
One of
there's
these
some
days,
interesting
I
psychological
would
differences
like,
between those two trips. So there you go.
yeah, man, that was interesting. Something I would like to do eventually is to learn how to survive and thrive. Survive and thrive.
Mhm.
Survive is not enough. I mean,
Yeah,
breathing is
and we
good.
learned that, right?
Yes,
We actually
but
learned there has to be some meaning to the thing.
yeah. What I'd like to be able to do is to be able to do it with nothing, to go out
Mhm.
without even a knife and be able to make my own knife from rock and do the whole living thing well. Not just to do it, but to do it well. And I now understand there's a difference between those two, but to do it
Mhm.
with no nothing brought with me. And
Yeah.
that's something I'm not there yet. Not remotely, but
A lot closer than we were 10 years ago.
a lot closer than we were 10 years ago.
And it's interesting to me that if you have that proper Zen attitude, it actually starts manifesting itself in better performance, right? It's not just in your head; it actually works better if you have the proper Zen attitude.
Yeah.
So, well, good times. I think that will probably wrap things up for today. We wanted to talk about the threshing too, but I think we are probably going to leave that for another time.
Yeah, video coming up in the near future. It was a very long, laborious process, and we learned a lot along the way.
Yeah, super worth doing though.
Super worth doing.
So thank you very much for listening. Again, you can find more information in the show notes / the video description, including our social media information. So thank you very much.
appreciate your
We'll see you next
support.
time.